Hey Jeff, great to reconnect with you, and thanks for taking out the time to chat today.
Absolutely. Just excited to see you again. Miss working with you and looking forward to talking.
Sure, I wanted to talk to you because you've been leading the customer experience team at your team at your company, and we have worked together. I really enjoyed working with you and seeing your perspective, like bringing in stakeholder communication, data-driven analysis, and this customer empathy to solving problems. And I felt that I'll get to learn a lot hearing from you on how things have changed, how you're leading the team, and maybe this will also help us drive more conversations for how this is done at other companies.
Yeah, and you're mistaken. I think I learned more from you than the other way around. And I think I particularly admire your curiosity, data first approach, respect for humans, and also humility, like in your most recent newsletter about carbohydrates. I think the humility is the biggest thing I took away from that. I love reading your
Thanks, you're too
work.
kind. So I thought we can start with the big picture for like customer experience and then get into the specifics. And I wanted to start with hearing about how is the customer experience team organized at your company and what's your role in it?
Sure. Well, it's changed a lot since you worked with us. I think when we worked together, it was split in half in terms of people who worked on infrastructure or the survey, the data flow, um, and then people who derived insights from mostly from reading raw comments and looking at scores. And I think since then, the team, as a function of the change and also just maturation of the program, we've onboarded two data scientists. To I think one of the things that I'll credit you for that. You said something to the effect of like your team produces great work, but I think there's more that can be done to prove it so that people can believe it and act on it. And so thank you for pushing us in that direction.
Interesting. It sounds like some of the challenge that you continue to face is around like making different teams, persuading different teams. And data scientists were one of the steps to reach that goal of persuading different teams to act on something.
Yeah, and even on that, I think my our approach has changed a little bit. When we were first created, I think the effort was more of persuasion, like, "Hey, this is going on, believe it, let's do something about it." Um, and I think lately, and maybe it's just a function of the environment, it's been less of persuasion, but more of a conversation and trying to distill reality together and then get to the recommendations if we get so far. It's been so much of like less of persuasion and more of collaboration, I would say.
Got it. And taking a step back on the organization, I realize you mentioned that you have two data scientists. Earlier,
Mhm.
the team was split between infrastructure and uh, raw comments.
Insights.
How
Yeah.
has that changed over time? What does the team look like now? How is the charter distributed across team members?
Yeah, we're a team of five. Um, I lead CX, and we live within a systems team. Um, we have one researcher, and she kind of does a lot of the same things I do, but she also collaborates more with other stakeholders like user experience, for example. There's two data scientists and also one engineer who you might know. His name's Grillia, um, but he focuses on keeping our surveys running, making sure we continue to hear from customers, making changes that we need to do, just keep up with the business and keep those listening posts open.
Got it. Understood. Yeah, that helps me understand the organization of the team, how things are
Yeah.
split. And one of the things we were talking about is how you have the model of working with stakeholders has changed. I was also wondering at a largest again, like coming to the big picture, what's an example or what was some recent challenge that you have faced in this role?
Yeah. I kind of alluded to it earlier, but I think like what the business wanted from CX has changed a lot. I mean, if you think back to when it was created, like it was created by verdict from COO at the time to, and honestly, the focus then was more of an R&D lens, and which is how we got to work together. So I'm thankful for that. And even as you move teams, and I think since then, just as a function of the business and also um, a function of CX movement. I don't know if you were around, but we moved from over into under customer success at the time. And then Because of that, we focused a lot on post sales, the post sales journey. And then now we're almost zooming out a little bit more, having moved under systems. Systems being defined not as product or product backend systems, but more on systems that go-to-market interfaces with, that has customer implications. So we almost went from like R&D product focus to go-to-market post-sales focus, and now zooming out to whole journey focus with a specific system charter, if that makes sense.
Got it. And when you say a specific system, what's an example of that?
Salesforce, Zendesk,
Yeah.
some of Monkey even, because people use it, and even systems that have not yet been created. Maybe there's something we need to empower agents to give a better experience.
Okay. So if we take the example of Salesforce or Zendesk, these are systems that are used by go-to-market teams like sales or customer success, but also by product teams or
Yes.
even support teams or stuff. So you're trying to look at what's the experience of different colleagues of using a system and how to improve that experience.
Right. And then here's where like I think there's where we believe we should focus and where the business wants. I think that would be a good summary of what the business wants from us, or at least they've officially declared. But I think we still maintain our identity as like, who is the customer, defining who that is, what are they doing first before we even then understand how can we help them. So the charter or the nomenclature or titles have changed, but our mission hasn't really changed from then.
Yeah, makes sense. And something that I've always found interesting is you can solve customer experience problems not just by changing the product or improving the product, but also by changing internal processes or processes that are used by customers. And like this seems to be one way where there might be an interest in your team working on internal processes or products. But there's also like if you can take the big picture lens of this is how these systems interact with the customers or impact customers, that helps you build a better picture of customer experience.
For sure. We're not short on opportunities to help.
I read. And yes, yeah, it sounds like another challenge is like prioritization, and it sounds like another thing that's it seems to be implicit. So one of the things you mentioned is whether it's Zendesk or Salesforce, they are used by a lot of cross-functional teams. The other you mentioned is the change in the model of operating with different teams. So what have you, since you work with several stakeholders, how much of your work is now driven by the collaborative nature with teams versus execution within your team?
Good question. In my role, I think it's 50-50 very much. Like I think setting direction internally and also building consensus externally, I think are both equally important. I'd break it down in half.
All right. And what would be some example of things that your team would do internally within the team?
Sure. Let me think of one that comes to mind that's like broadly applicable. One would be right now we're working with another team internally to make sure that the source of data that we're using to determine which customers are eligible to receive our surveys is exactly as we intend. Like, are we serving the people that we should, that we want to at the right time with the right questions? That's mostly internally driven first. And then we decide, right, what we want first and then collaborate externally with another team. Another example of an internal project is we depend on other teams, right, historically to run, generate, initiate some of the queries that we run. And I think an effort is being made to take those in-house. And some of the data scientists are helping us do that just so that we can have more control over our own business, right? And that we're not dependent on other people to make changes, if that makes sense. Externally, hard to give an example of those. Very fundamental. And you might bring some stuff back for you, but like even defining who the customer is. Like I think everybody internally has a different idea of who that is. Like, marketing might consider a prospect a customer, right? Whereas R&D might consider someone above a certain monthly spend threshold as a customer. And then sales has a different definition and operations has a different definition. And so a lot of it is like defining who the customer is and before even talking about like what they're experiencing and how we can improve it.
Oh yeah.
It's bringing it back.
Tricky discussions, yes. Like for example, for support, customer support, a customer who's on the free version is still a customer because
Yeah.
they might send questions. Whereas for maybe accounting, it's above X number of X dollars a month or yeah, that makes sense. And so we talked about some internal projects, some external like collaboration with other teams. What have you seen work well when collaborating with other stakeholders?
We talked about this in our team meeting today. I think it's first how you approach other people, um, especially in this environment where there's a lot of fear and uncertainty. Um, it holds true in any environment, though. I think it's like approaching people with curiosity, humility, and I will add an extra one: safety. Like, I think CX can also often be viewed as accountability or nosy or meddling. And I think like we can really like stand out by being helpful and asking non-charged questions and seeking data rather than opinions. And it's okay to share hypotheses, but share them as such and really work together to find the truth instead of just taking things and instead of assuming things. So like that applies to stakeholders in every function, every role. I think that disposition and that way of approaching people sets you up for success rather than making it more difficult for yourself.
That makes sense. I mean, the macroeconomic environment has changed, and in general, like persuading someone means having trust and credibility, and trust means like
Mhm.
having that environment of safety
Yeah.
is very crucial. So nice that you have already thought through different ways that help you reach that goal, so that you can continue building those strengths for your team. That's amazing. Switching gears from like working with teams to working without teams, or the opposite of teams, which is like machines. Uh,
Hmm.
Still in the context of customer experience, so I want to talk about processes and stuff. What are the different ways that you measure customer experience?
Yeah. Um, I'll talk about a data source that I don't think we've utilized fully. Um, one of the in every survey invitation, we offer customers an open-ended question like, "How can we do better?" Or a version of like, "What is the reason why you gave that NPS score?" Right? And there's just a lot of text, right? And I think the context of the text is often pretty wide, and there's a big hurdle in terms of turning those into insights and quantifiable data. And so in the past, like in our write-ups, we would cherry pick, to be honest, and try to pick one that's not the most sensational, but the most representative, right? But even then, there's a translation layer, right? Like this is what the customer is saying, and then internally, the business would have to trust us that the insights that we get from it are not only representative, but actually in line with what the customer is saying. So there's a big leap there. And I think in terms of machines, um, as the business has grown, the volume of data has grown. And it just hasn't been scalable or possible for someone like myself to read everything that customers say and then make those determinations, let alone make them believable. So we are we've historically used tools like AWS Comprehend to implement approaches like topic classification, topic modeling. Um, so recently, with all the developments in our industry, um, we've been testing on how to do that and how to set it up in a way that doesn't require one-off runs, in a way that produces dashboards that we can quickly look at and do things like you did, like when you were working here too, like measuring things that were not captured by categories that already existed, and doing it in a quantifiable way. So for both from a known and unknown perspective.
Got it. That makes sense. So you're talking about a new way of new data source that hasn't been utilized as much to measure customer
Yeah.
experience, which is the text box along with any survey, for example, NPS survey. And there's a lot of
Yes.
gold here, but it's hard to scalably and in an unbiased manner, convert that data into insights. And so you're
Absolutely.
trying more stuff there. Yeah, I remember we were trying monkey learn and some stuff, and none of those were perfect. And
Hmm.
recently, I interviewed 40 customers about something, or 40 businesses about something. And I was trying to go from, okay, I've interviewed them. I have this huge spreadsheet of all the questions and all the answers I asked, but how do I convert it to something? And
Right.
I tried out ChatGPT, and it was somewhat helpful. But it maybe like it at least kind of what they say is like helping you get over writer's block. So that's how I found it help. But again, it's not scalable. So what's a way for it to something to repeatably keep working and keep tagging stuff is still a big problem. So interesting problem to solve.
Yeah, and one of the learnings that just apply everywhere to people taking similar approaches that I want to share. We, with the focus on internal application, like created categories and subcategories based on those internal applications. Because we envisioned a dashboard of, oh, hey, this many customers relative to last month are talking about this issue. Team internally go do it. But I think our recent learning is that, and it's not really groundbreaking, but customers obviously say and express things differently. So I think what we have done since is created two dimensions that map together. One being, this is what the customer will say, this is what it'll sound like. Internally, this is what that maps to. And so I think we use the first data set for training classification, and then we use the second data set to present and make suggestions internally. Seems really fundamental, but it's one thing that we missed, and that's something that I hope other people we could save them the time of doing that.
That makes sense, and I feel like this is a common gotcha because in the sense that this might be something that people do overlook, because I see that there's this the hope that, oh, if you have a large language model, then you can use any survey response, any human text to convert it into structured information. But the challenge is exactly what you said: is you
Right.
need some predefined tags, because at the end of the day, you need to convert this to your organizational structure or your product structure, your product lineup, and that's where this careful mapping comes into picture. That makes a lot of sense.
And taking a cue from you, right? Our initial reaction is like, this LLM sucks. But then being humble, it's like, oh wait, it's actually us. We need to do some extra legwork to make it compatible and help it out.
Yeah, it makes sense. And so we talked about one thing, but similarly, like what processes or tools do you use which help you increase the coverage of customer experience measurements to improve your team's understanding of customer experience?
Yeah. All the same touch points and infrastructure that were there when you were here still apply. I think since then we stood up some new surveys that are lifecycle based and rather less based on interaction. So we have a sign up survey that sends out a questionnaire around 28 days post sign up. As the sign up process itself has lengthened, we've had to change the time at which we ask those. So that's one of the newer ones. And then something that I was talking about today with someone on our operations team. As we as a company mature in our understanding of customers, we can think beyond specific teams and interactions and focus on journeys. So once you do the legwork to align on who the customer is, what their journey is, and then we can measure points for those customers within the journey instead of just talking about groups as a whole.
Yeah, understood. So that those are some things that are helping you get a better understanding of the customers, right?
Yeah.
Not looking at it per product, looking at it across the company, not across the company, but more like across the customer's journey, and looking at it at the life cycle.
Yes.
This is a process which helps you increase your understanding. On the other hand, what processes or tools do you use to reduce the effort or time by you and other teams in measuring and improving customer experience?
Yeah, I mean, as you are familiar, we have been a Looker heavy shop or a company, right? And I think Looker is powerful for those who are comfortable with the way that the company organizes its data. But executives, new employees, like they're just not, right? So what our team has done since is built a CX data dictionary, which obviously includes things that CX doesn't own, but kind of gets past that first hurdle, like what are we looking at and what's available. And then secondly, we use more Tableau these days. Like Tableau, a little bit less flexible, which means you do have to do some work upfront to organize, but once it's there, it's a little bit harder to mess up. You can't really do anything that you didn't program, right? So versus Looker, you change one variable, you don't know what you're looking at anymore. So I would almost say define those in two ways. One, specificity, visibility, availability through the dictionary, and then restriction almost through Tableau, like making it the context a little bit more defined for the end user, who could be anybody in the company.
Understood. Understood. So moving from Looker to Tableau, or like adding emphasis on Tableau and adding emphasis on a CX data dictionary, are
Yep.
processes that are helping you reduce the time to measure and improve customer experience by your team and by like other stakeholders.
Yeah. And then again, it sounds really fundamental. Just what are we talking about? And then also making it easy for them to access. Like little things like Looker, right? You need access to all the data and permissions underlying. And that's also the same challenge with Tableau, but I think more we found that more users are comfortable with one or the other, and that may be different for each organization depending on the composition.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Like there's always something better that we figure out at each incremental stage. So the change makes sense and the change of priority. So in the realm of tools and softwares, what was the most recent software or tool that you or your team have signed up for?
Yeah, one that we can share. We experimented recently with Hugging Face, which is an open source large language models. We used that for initial testing. Um, as we learn more about AI, as we learn more about how we can make our data more powerful and get more out of it.
Right.
It's free
And
too, so
oh yeah, yeah. How was your experience with it?
it was good. One learning that we found out that I think others might benefit from, if you use the interface, right? They limit you to 10 tags up front, but that's because we're using their processing, right? But if we use the API, from what I understand, you can use more than 10. So um, playing with them helps you learn more about how the tool works and also how to get more out of it.
Are there any other tools that you use on a day-to-day basis for work? Like we talked about um, Looker, Tableau, and um Hugging Face.
Mhm.
I'm sure there's a lot of other tools you use. Are there any other that come to mind?
Yeah, and it kind of depends on who's asking what they have access to, right? So if people on the finance side or the sales side are asking, I'm more inclined to use something like Salesforce reporting, just because that's what they're familiar with and it's available. Even though Salesforce is not inherently a reporting tool, right? Like it kind of depends on the customer. Other tools that we use Qualtrics, right? Qualtrics is our survey platform, and there's dashboarding in there. Other tools that we use, um, some of those are limited to what the company allows to. But
Yes.
those are two that come to mind. Um, are there some that you're curious about?
S- yeah, I guess like anything for onboarding, anything for analytics.
Our data scientists use tools, but I don't use them personally. Um, there are some that I probably am not qualified to speak about, but those are the ones that I use.
Uh, that's helpful. So we talked about like getting information, getting like written information from customers, the surveys, and then understanding that using Looker or Tableau. And we also talked about Salesforce or Zendesk, which are or Monkey, which are other ways for people to interact with customers and customer data.
The journeys like Lucid Chart, when we use Figma often, um,
Yeah,
visual presentation tools, those are also in play.
makes sense. And given the volume of information, how do you? And I guess this is something I'm guessing the answer to this is all the new experiments you're trying. But I was trying to understand, how do you understand customer needs from hundreds of support tickets, sales call recordings, NPS survey responses? And I'm guessing this might be the Hugging Face, or I don't know if there's something else that helps you process the huge volume of information. How do you
Yes.
process a huge volume of information? Because you have sales calls recordings, NPS
Yeah.
survey responses, which you talked about, and there's also support tickets. So one is, there are different types of data for every customer, and
Mhm.
there's also a lot of customers.
In terms of capacity, we have hit some limits, and we do need to work with other teams to make sure that they continue to function. Because sometimes some certain capacity areas like shut everything down for like 100% and for days. So I think we have built some monitoring to make sure that we are within what's capable, um, given the large data set. Does that answer what you're wondering?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, I guess like incrementally figuring it out, but it's still challenges.
We find out when bad things happen,
We
basically.
always unknown unknowns are always there.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and also determining what is within our control and what are not. Like some of these capacity constraints, because large volume, are within our business, within Twilio, and some are not. And so it's kind of a find out as you go.
Is there anything else you would like to share about leading customer experience improvements?
Yeah. And I think this is one thing that I always talk about. Like, I think there's a tension between like spending a lot of time reading individual cases, talking to individual customers, and then doing it at scale. And I think if I were to think about this year, with all the change that's happened in our business and all the focus on automation and doing things more efficiently, surprisingly, some of the learnings and the insights and the more powerful things that we've uncovered have come from reading individual cases. So like, it's not scalable and it goes counter to everything we're saying and working toward. But like, there's something to be said about like really seeing each customer situation for what it is, pretending to be them, having empathy, and then kind of like drawing out an individual customer's journey as well as a cohort.
Any tips of wisdom on when a practitioner can decide this is the time for me to deep dive and read a few or 100 cases individually versus this is the time for me to look at the cohort picture?
Yeah, twofold, right? I mean, sometimes there's high level diagnostics that like concerning. I wonder if it's an edge case or a one-off or if it's representative. I think there's that approach, but there's also, I mean, customers will escalate to us directly, right? And I don't think customers do that unless they have no option. So it's something that we don't want to happen a lot, but when it does, that's one situation where it's worth taking a look. I think also, I didn't realize this so recently, but asking a manager, like, hey, what's the worst case that you came across this month? Like, can I read it? So yeah, that's like, again, they have to feel safe. They have to trust you that you're not going to put that one on blast and that you're just really trying to learn. But those are 3 ways that we do that.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. This is really helpful for me to get a better sense of measuring and improving customer experience and how things keep evolving in an evolving organization. Thanks a lot.